Hi there, and thank you for joining us. My name is Athena Malice, and I'm the editor at CRN Australia. And welcome to our CRN webinar, How MSPs Can Win in the Evolving VDI Landscape, sponsored by Nerdio. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. In today's webinar, we are joined by James Morrow, Partner Success Manager at Nerdio, and Paul Heaton, Co-founder and CEO at CubeSys. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for the introduction. Just for the audience, as Athena mentioned, I'm James, and I joined Nerdio about 18 months ago to lead our MSP business here across Australia and New Zealand. So I work with our partners to really enable them to adopt our platform and really deliver effective sort of managed services around AVD and M365 to your clients. Over to you, Paul.
Morning, everybody. I'm Paul Heaton, co-founder and CEO of CubeSys. We've been a Microsoft partner for over 13 years and personally been involved in end-user compute, VDI, and the IT industry for over 30 years. My team focus on Azure and M365 and, of course, AVD, which we're here to talk about today. Over 130 projects delivered, so plenty of things to experience to share with you guys.
Amazing, amazing. Well, in this session, we're going to be exploring the benefits and opportunities virtual desktops bring MSPs. We will be breaking down the issues Aussie MSPs are facing with legacy virtual desktops and how Nerdio can help them overcome these hurdles. And we will also be discussing how Microsoft's flexible licensing approach empowers MSPs to move away from legacy providers like Citrix and offer more agile, cost-effective solutions to customers. I just want to let everyone know that this is a casual format, so please send through your questions and we're going to address them at the end. We want to try and answer as much as possible, so please don't be shy and send them through. But let's dive in. So, James, what are some of the biggest challenges Aussie MSPs are facing with legacy virtual desktop platforms today? And how is Nerdio helping them overcome these hurdles?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the challenges that MSPs have with sort of legacy virtual desktop systems, whether that be Citrix or whether that be traditional RDS environments, is that there's often lock-in required, whether that be licensing to the vendor, or whether that be locking into hardware and needing to justify and sweat a hardware investment, maybe say that's the next 3 to 5 years for running these solutions in a traditional on-prem environment. There's the manual hours that go into then managing those setups and those configurations, managing that on-prem infrastructure. And there's an ever-growing skill gap in the industry when it comes to retaining and hiring good talent that has the skills around managing sort of virtual desktop infrastructure. So for the audience, for anyone who might have heard of Nerdio previously, we came to market back in 2018 with the goal of helping IT professionals maximize their investment in the Microsoft cloud. And really, Azure was really gaining legs back in 2018. But back then it was very command line driven. It was very PowerShell driven to do any of the deployments. And, but Microsoft was bringing this technology called Windows Virtual Desktop, which we now know as Azure Virtual Desktop. But there was really no roadmap for MSPs on how to do it at scale, right? Microsoft make these amazing platforms, but they're really designed at big enterprise. They're not designed for MSPs to kind of take to their clients at scale. So our platform was born, and we help MSPs in 4 aspects: price, deploy, manage, and optimize. So built into our tool is the ability to price out an Azure and AVD solution. If anyone has used the Microsoft cost calculator, they know it takes a PhD just to get an output out of it. So Nerdio simplifies that. And we also have built automation and configuration and baselines into being able to deploy, manage, and then cost optimize the environment. So really enabling MSPs to do more with the resources they have and not have to commit the sort of manual hours and time that it traditionally takes to configure some of these environments.
Yeah, great. And I guess, Paul, from your point of view, what challenges have you and your customers faced in the past with VDI platforms?
I think the reality is that the legacy VDI platforms are from a different era. Right? If you look at the challenges we had around managing the compute and storage at the back end and those sort of fixed units. You can sort of expand beyond that. Then the control plane, maintaining that and making sure we did the security layers. It was just, VDI was a technology stack that has always been full of so much potential, right? But then was difficult to deliver cost effectively, make it reliable and robust, and give the end users a great experience. There's always a challenge in the legacy VDI world. And as we move now to cloud, a lot of those problems have been solved. So, particularly the end user experience, they really get a genuine desktop, right? That you find really difficult to tell the difference between your laptop in front of you and an AVD desktop, and it's a game changer, right? That's where we want to be.
Yeah, definitely. And Paul, Cubesys is a Microsoft and Azure specialist partner. Can you talk us through that journey of choosing Nerdio as a platform for managing your customers' AVD infrastructure and how it's changed the way that you've worked?
Oh, definitely. I've probably told this story like 100 times. Like, it's interesting. Cubesys are a little bit of context and background. We're a Microsoft-focused and specialist partner. Right, we have specializations from Microsoft. We have 2 MVPs in the team. We have our own DevOps team and developers, where we actually have a product in the Azure marketplace to help you manage Azure tags at scale. Right? So, with all that context, when AVD came along and we were one of the first partners in Australia that Microsoft approached to help them get AVD, or WVD back then, established. And we're doing a couple of POCs, then COVID hit. And we went from doing a couple of POCs to doing like 40 projects. Right? And in the midst of all that, obviously, we're very busy, and all the capabilities in our team, we're looking at automating things ourselves. And I kept getting nudged to come and meet the Nerdio team. And I resisted 2 or 3 times, and then eventually I went, look, okay, I'll sit down and we'll have a chat. And I distinctly remember that meeting with Vadim and Joseph, because I walked out of that and went, stop developing. It was that simple. I could see the value, right, in a product. I've been around long enough to know when something's going to work in that. And fast forward now, 5-6 years later, and we have done, like I said, in excess of 130 projects. You could count on one hand the ones that don't use Nerdio, right? And that's because of what we're able to deliver to our clients. Right, the benefits that we can give them, the lack of lock-in, and that's both commercial and technical. For a lot of the audience, if you don't realize it, Nerdio sits alongside the Microsoft technology stack to enhance it. It doesn't interfere with it. So if you're not happy with Nerdio, you can remove it at any point and keep your AVD environment in place. Now, that for me just talks to a company that puts the rest of their roles on value. If you're not adding value, if Nerdio's not delivering value to that environment, then you're going to remove it. You're not going to have a business. Like I said, over the last 5 years, $130, we've used Nerdio extensively in all of our offerings because of the level of automation it gives us and cost control, but also the reduction in the operational overhead that we get. And I'm sure we're going to dive into that as we continue.
Yeah. And if I can add on to that, a common conversation that I have with MSPs, Paul, is that Microsoft has built out Azure to now it isn't command line driven anymore. You've got an interface. You can go in there. It is sort of somewhat GUI driven. And as you mentioned there, Nerdio we have to keep evolving. We have to keep delivering value to our clients and our partners. But what is it around some of those automations and sort of what Microsoft doesn't give you out of the box that Nerdio does? Because a common question that I get asked from MSPs is, well, Microsoft gives us Azure. We can now go in there and click it. Why Nerdio? What are the automations? What is the value add that Nerdio brings? Why wouldn't I just use Azure natively? And what have you been able to do with our platform that you would have previously had to invest a significant amount of engineering time into to do?
Where to start, James? There's so many different facets, right? But it's everything. When you're running an environment like that, the first thing is visibility, right? I need to know what I've got deployed, where, how much it's costing us, and so that layer of visibility across multiple clients is gold, right? And then we've got to make sure we're deeply integrating the security, right? And the identity-led security is foremost. And so how we control that in Nerdio is fantastic, especially again when you're using the MSP product and doing that across multiple clients. That's a game changer. When we're using some of our enterprise clients, we have to log into their environment, still get a tremendous amount of value, but we're looking after individual environments, right? So that layer from the MSP products, fantastic. But then when you dive into things like the custom scripts and the library of things that we can use from there, which are so powerful, right? To be able to automate things. And now the advisory stuff that's coming back in where it goes, hey, you know, if you change the VM SKU, you could help save money on that, and that analytics that's happening. So yeah, there's many facets. It's, I think my team would be aghast if we couldn't use Nerdio for an AVD project. Right?
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. We love hearing that there's more automation happening, focusing on things that actually matter. And James, why are you seeing more Australian businesses and MSPs starting to rethink their long-term reliance on Citrix, and how does Nerdio fit into that journey?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest ones, and I think MSPs and clients have seen the shift since the take private of not just Citrix, but some of the other sort of like legacy VDI vendors as well, and their real focus on moving to be sort of like an enterprise only, and on the back of that, some really long-term license commits, which is a real challenge for businesses, and one of the biggest things that AVD and Nerdio, because we're consumption based, is gives you is that ability to scale that some of these legacy VDI vendors just aren't giving anymore. That's both scaling up and scaling down. So when we talk about scaling up, if you really want to use VDI as that enabler, when you do, and Paul and the team have certainly experienced this with some of their clients, as soon as you deliver them a virtual desktop that is a enabler for their business, they find more and more use cases within the organization to do it. But to do that with some of the legacy VDI vendors, you've got to go back to the vendor, you've got to get a quote, you've got to wait, it might take weeks to months, it's then got to go maybe through a procurement process, maybe it goes to tender, all those kind of things. With AVD, with Azure, and with Nerdio, it's consumption based. If today you have 100 users and tomorrow you need 200, fantastic. If today you've got 500 and tomorrow you need 300, great. You can kind of scale up and down and have that flexibility for the MSP that is delivering the service to really meet the sort of demands of their client, which you sort of don't get with some of those, traditional VDI solutions. Yeah, of course.
Isn't it refreshing that there's a vendor that actually aligns to what the business, our clients, need, right? So in the real world, businesses do grow, but they also shrink, right? And so having that flexibility to maneuver when you need to, and be transparent and honest with our clients about that I think is really powerful, right? And it is that ability to move, right? And Nerdio doesn't lock you in like we're seeing with some of these other vendors, which makes us building business models and solutions for our clients really difficult. Right?
Yeah. So that's the key reason. And the other thing which we're going to get onto, we've got a sort of another question later that I'll tackle this, but it's not just, what are the legacy VDI vendors doing? It's the fact that Microsoft has made such an investment into AVD and Windows 365 that there now isn't a technology gap anymore. Previously, and Paul can probably talk to this better than I can, previously some of the sort of legacy VDI vendors like Citrix, before there was AVD and Windows 365, if you wanted to run Teams environments and if you wanted to sort of have a seamless user experience, really it was Citrix or nothing really. Whereas now with the investment that Microsoft has made into AVD and Windows 365, running Teams environments out of AVD is a seamless experience as what you would have got previously with Citrix. So it's both, what are the traditional sort of legacy vendors doing with sort of their shift in focus and sort of long-term contracts and lack of flexibility? This is a real challenge. But what is Microsoft doing with the investment they've made to really bridge that gap? And I think, Paul, you've got a customer that you worked with where you did a kind of a side-by-side comparison.
Yes, I can't name them, unfortunately, but a large energy provider in Australia where they were interested in AVD. They've got legacy Citrix environment, but obviously they're aware that there's Citrix Cloud and you can run an AVD workload behind Citrix. So we did a comparison, did a like-for-like proof of concept, and we went through a lot of use cases with them and sort of proving that value out between the two different solutions. Long story short, look, Citrix is a great technology. Unfortunately, the overhead that comes with that sort of legacy history is the problem, right? So as you well know, James, when you use AVD, Microsoft provide the control plane for you and they keep that evergreen. When we're doing Citrix, we've still got to use or pay for that cloud bit and all control that protocol and the control plane that comes with that, right? So, the benefits we get from using Microsoft are, many-fold, right, in that space. Right?
Yeah. The ability, scale, and flexibility is so important. And Paul, looking in 2025 and very much the digital age that we're in right now, what does a modern virtual desktop experience look like for Australian end users as a partner and working with end users?
Well, firstly, it just works, right? How about that? Look, when we look back at legacy VDI, for honest, the connectivity issues, apps crashing, resource congestion between different users on the same VM, right? All those types of things were really, really challenging. And James talked about things like Teams and other video conferencing tools. You just couldn't use them. Teams in AVD is seamless. It just works. And it's because Microsoft have invested in some technology at the back end, in particular FS Logics for the profile time, we can give a really unique experience to users and even cache their Outlook and OneDrive files and things if you need. So really can provide a like-for-like experience between your laptop in front of them and what you're used to using in a modern desktop and AVD. You can't tell the difference. And of course, what that gives us then is a desktop that we can port anywhere on any device, right? And consume from anywhere with the right conditional access and MFA at the front. If you're external to your organization, we can then secure that workload.
And what I'm finding, Paul, a lot of the conversations I'm having with MSPs that have clients that are looking at maybe moving off legacy VDI systems, whether that's Citrix, whether that's RDS. Often it's viewed as a real, almost like a business risk, and some organizations are trying to do anything they can to kind of move legacy applications into SaaS base and sort of move off VDI because it's seen as not an enabler to their business. It's seen as a technology that is almost it is costly, and it's almost a business risk. But what we're finding, a lot of organizations, yes, there are organizations that are still have those legacy business systems, legacy applications that just work, and it's sort of like, we don't want to touch it, we don't want it to break, so we're not going to try and take this into a SaaS base. But we're seeing more and more organizations utilize AVD in Windows 365 combined with the M365 stack as a part of a sort of a total sort of modern work component, right? It doesn't
use cases I could and clients I spring to mind when you talk about that. It isn't just about, because if you think about what we used legacy VDI for previously, it was for really badly written applications, right? And they couldn't traverse the network, so we would use VDI as a sort of front door to those to allow them. That's not the case with Windows 365 or with AVD, right? What we're finding with our client base is when we put AVD in place, they'll come up with another use case and another use case. A government department here in New South Wales, we went in there to replace that old legacy published app piece for AVD and came out with 12 different use cases. And that's because they had scientists and engineers that needed GPU bases, and buying a GPU desktop is expensive and it's limited life, and we can just provide those sort of AutoCAD and high-end GPU use cases in the cloud, and they only need to use it when and if they need it. They had developers, they had people coming in, third-party people coming, vendors to come in and support their environment, so they could give them like a privileged access desktop that was locked down inside of it. So many use cases come out. And that energy provider, I don't think I finished the story there when you answered your question, James, but that energy provider we talked about, when they put Citrix and AVD and Nerdio side by side, they had overseas call center desk. That's their use case. It was like they needed that continuity and that security that we can provide with a virtual desktop when being used overseas. And by the way, when we did that and we put them side by side, we found one small thing that we couldn't do with AVD compared to the Citrix desktop. And that was something about recording the actual desktop session. We found an appropriate third-party tool to close that gap and save them $500,000 a year on their licensing with Citrix, right? So some really powerful use cases out there, and every time we just keep more and more can come through for different use cases. Those developer desktops and engineering desktops are quite prevalent. Right?
Yeah, wow, saving $500,000 is so important, especially this day and age with cost of living and all that.
The project quite comfortably, and with some pocket change,
Yeah, spend it on other things, save it for a rainy day. James, why do you believe Microsoft has been recognized by Gartner as the leader in virtual desktop infrastructure? And you've already kind of spoken about it, but please dive in a bit more.
Yeah, so we've got a slide that sort of represents sort of the Gartner Magic Quadrant for DAS from 2023 over to 2024 that we can bring up on the screen. And, if we look at the desktop as a service market, firstly, Gartner predicts that it'll move from a $3 billion market last year to a $4.4 billion market by 2028. So almost a 50% increase in a technology that is sometimes viewed as legacy, right? I have a lot of and we've mentioned this a number of times, but I have a number of conversations with MSPs that go, well, why do I need a virtual desktop? My clients have moved to SaaS-based, right? That's sort of the VDI is a technology of the past. So despite that being the view in some situations, because of, again, what Microsoft is doing with AVD and Windows 365 and the new use cases that you can get for it, it is a massively growing market. And if we look at some of the trends from Gartner, from their customer base that they surveyed, 55% of customers have already deployed or in the process of deploying some kind of desktop as a service solution. Another 14% are running proof of concept, and another 16% are close to starting their proof of concept. So you're talking about 85% of the market have some kind of footprint or are about to have some kind of footprint in a desktop as a service market. And then when we look specifically at Microsoft, you can see across the two graphs, Microsoft has really over the last year extended their sort of lead in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And if we look at the information from Gartner as to why, it's because Microsoft offers both AVD and Windows 365. So you've got that kind of infrastructure-based, consumption-based model, the flexibility around AVD, but you've also got their SaaS-based offering around Windows 365, and you can find different clients and even within customers, those two solutions, AVD and Windows 365, are going to sort of have different use cases. So it's providing that flexibility to their clients. AVD and Windows 365 have the largest global install base, and they're not only have a larger install base than any of their competitors, they're growing faster than any of their competitors. So Microsoft in this space are the biggest and growing faster than anyone else, which kind of I think says a lot. The integration with M365 and Intune and Defender, like Paul was mentioning, every customer has some kind of Microsoft footprint. Almost every MSP we chat to is familiar with Intune. They're familiar with Defender, with Entra. The fact that AVD and Windows 365 can seamlessly fit into that. And a majority of customers, if they're utilizing Business Premium or E3 or E5 licenses, already have the entitlement to run AVD. So they're not having to go out and acquire another license. And lastly, Gartner really recognizes Microsoft as the ability to execute, having clear and consistent marketing and communication around what their strategy is. So that's really the sort of key reasons why Microsoft is the leader in this space, and isn't just the leader, but it is growing their lead over their competitors.
Yeah, wow, that's really, really interesting. And Paul, how has automation and management and simplified management core to Nerdio's offering changed the way CubeSys has been able to think about virtual desktop delivery?
Well, I think it's a game changer, like I've been alluding to in this conversation, that the level of automation we get is fantastic, right? And that's usually the first draw card with Nerdio to most people. And you look at what you need to do with the native tooling from Microsoft. There's a lot to add as a IT department or as a partner in that space. And Nerdio closes that gap. And for me, it makes scalability and that enterprise grade capabilities just like possible with AVD. Other than that, you've got a lot of legwork to do, right? So automation, we have things like automatic patching. I've got clients where they're fairly simple application landscape. So we actually just pull down the image from the Microsoft Cloud that's pre-patched every month, layer on the apps and push it out to our clients, and my engineers sit back and watch that happen, right? That level of automation is very difficult to achieve. And we're doing that in a platform that helps us see the problems and raise up the problems, right? And rather than us digging around and fighting with the Azure platform, we're actually looking at how do we tweak the end user experience? How do we get a better result for our clients rather than, worrying about the widgets behind the scene? And Nerdio really closes that gap, right? And makes things like that possible, right? So huge advantage, I think, for us as we try to bring solutions to our clients.
And we actually, just to touch on what Paul you mentioned is there, we've got some more information and some data on a slide as well. We actually had an economic validation study, so an independent validation study done on Nerdio Manager, and what came out of that was some sort of key metrics. So again, you don't just have to sort of trust what I say. I'm biased. I love that platform, and obviously, Paul does as well. It's the reason they use it. But coming out of that economic validation study, it was shown that using Nerdio Manager reduces the overall admin effort that Paul was mentioning then by 50%. The overall cost savings and sort of total cost of ownership of the solution, both from our ability to get more granular in terms of Azure savings, being able to kind of auto scale the environment more granular than you can out of the box with inside native Azure, as well as the ability to put the role-based access and the controls and the workflows in place inside of Nerdio to allow some of your lower level engineers within your organizations to do more, because you can kind of put the appropriate guardrails in and around what your level 1 and level 2 engineers can and can't do, freeing up the time of your more senior engineers to really focus on your most important customers and your most important projects, rather than those level 3, 4 engineers being stuck with, getting tickets escalated to them and getting stuck doing some of the sort of manual day-to-day. We've automated that for you. So there was an overall reduction in cost by 55%. And there was also a 60% reduction in human error, right? But being able to automate a lot of this stuff, and a lot of the sort of life cycle management that Paul was mentioning, so the patching, the updating, the FS Logics management, the FS Logics configuration, auto scaling the environment, so making sure the resources are available when ready, or when needed as users go to log in and log off. A 60% reduction in human error, you look at that and go, okay, great. But the outcome of that is customer gets a more seamless user experience for their environment. It just works, as Paul was mentioning.
Let me chip in, James. I don't think we can give you a real world example, right? Because I'll arc back to COVID times, because this is a great story, right? We had a client that used AVD and had recently moved across to it, and they had about 80 people maybe most days working on that. And then remember, Adelaide had those city snap lockdowns when they shut down the city for a week, right? And this client's offices were right in CBD, couldn't go in. We went from 80 to 800 users on that platform. And you know what we did? We watched. The automation took over. It spun up the additional host pools. The profiles all just worked because they're in FS Logics. The whole experience was us just making sure that the guardrails were happening, watching. There wasn't any additional engineering effort. And that level of automation, the ability to be able to react in hours to a client's need to grow significantly, was obviously back then during COVID very, very powerful, but even today, right? So important that we can do that. And that level of automation and capability was only possible with AVD because of the Nerdio platform, right?
And that's, touching on that scaling, Paul, when we walk an MSP through and guide them through a proof of concept and help them provision the infrastructure, once they've got it working and they've gone through user testing, to go from a proof of concept to production is literally changing a few settings with Nerdio, and then Nerdio takes over, it provisions the infrastructure. And that shocks some MSPs occasionally, because when they look at Azure and AVD, part of the ability to make it cost effective is using host pools, using a smaller number of machines, scaling them, turning them on, those resources on and off as needed. But sometimes that as a concept can be almost scary to an MSP, because they view it and go, well, now we're expected to, like a traditional, say, RDS type setup, where we just have one big server that everyone logs into and we just run it 24/7. If we're expected to have 8 or 10 machines in a pool that we scale as needed, that is going to, 10x our workload in terms of the amount of management. It actually doesn't. Whether you're managing one machine in a host pool or 1,000 machines in a pool, the sort of the host pool management is the automation within Nerdio is sort of responsible for that, which is how you can get that scalability and that optimization.
Very, very granular. There's lots of things we can do there once we understand the use case clearly, right? And switch. So that automation is not a one size fits all, right? There's lots of things we can do in there to make it appropriate for the use case.
It's great hearing just you sitting there watching the automation happen. That's amazing. Just sit back, relax, have a cup of tea, Let the platform do the job for you.
I use that term a bit. Part of the sort of automation built into our platform is when you're doing a greenfield deployment with Nerdio. And again, we have teams of engineers that will guide you through this, and I might mention that sort of the support we offer at the end. But it takes often around 60 to 90 minutes to go from provisioning the file share, the networks, the Azure infrastructure, to get to a point 60 to 90 minutes, and you've got a desktop for a customer to log into to start testing. And I say of that 60 to 90 minutes, a majority of that is waiting for Microsoft to provision the infrastructure. It's actually probably only 10 to 15 minutes of clicking buttons in Nerdio. You can go get a coffee for most of that hour and sort of let Nerdio and Microsoft take over in the background. So
yeah, that's so good.
We've got professional services businesses to run here, right? It takes there's lots of skills they need, right? And lots of experience to do that. I think the platform does help tremendously, right, in that space. That means that we spend more time talking to our clients about making sure that they're comfortable with the cybersecurity footprint and their posture, about the network and everything, things that are probably just outside of Nerdio. We can help with those things and make it run quickly, right, for the project.
Yeah, it's really important to be customer facing as well. So being able to be in front of a customer and speak to them more is so important these days. Also, just want to let the audience know, please send through all your questions as well. Don't be shy. There is no question that we won't ask, so please send them through. James, how does Microsoft's flexible licensing approach empower MSPs to move away from legacy providers like Citrix and offer more agile, cost-effective solutions to customers?
Yeah, I mean, right from the very start, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that there is no lock-in, you don't have to go to a vendor to get a quote, as we're all probably familiar. Azure is consumption-based and Nerdio is consumption-based as well. You can start building in parallel a proof of concept. So before you've had to consider moving off, your legacy on-prem infrastructure, maybe you're in a private data center where you've got a contract is going to end, and you've got to either look at, are we going to renew that contract with that on-prem data center, or maybe you've got a Citrix license renewal coming up, whatever it is. AVD with Nerdio, you can build a proof of concept with zero lock-in, zero commitment required by anyone. We make it really sort of cost-effective from a time point of view to get that initial proof of concept spun up, and you can demonstrate to the client and the customer that this solution is going to work, and so there doesn't have to be any kind of concerns around that. We have to make a commitment. They can make an informed decision before they decide to go one way or the other. And then, I mean, we've mentioned it a number of times now, the ability to have no lock-in, the ability to kind of scale as needed. As I said, day one, it might be 50 users, and then they find more use cases, and all of a sudden, in 6 months' time, they might have 500 users that need it. And then maybe in a year's time, that organization diversifies, maybe they divest, maybe they sell off part of their business, and they need to go from 500 users back to 200, for instance. All of that kind of flexibility around Microsoft, the fact that, AVD isn't an additional SKU you need, it's baked into your Microsoft licensing, all sort of, adds the ability for MSPs to really offer it as a true desktop as a service, right? AVD isn't a license, isn't a license SKU that the customer can take and sort of shop you around to kind of race to the bottom. AVD is a true sort of service offering from an MSP. And so, you can really kind of differentiate yourself in that space. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. And Paul, for MSP supporting hybrid and remote teams across Australia, what are some of the must-have features in a management solution like Nerdio?
I think, like I mentioned before, I think the visibility is the first thing that we've got to have. We're in a consumption era, so if we have got to have really clear and good visibility on where things are deployed, how much they're costing, what SKUs and VMs, right? Because that, depending on how you package your services, either it's a cost directly to the client or it's something that you're controlling, and that will hit your margins then, right? So visibility is number one. Automation, we've talked about that lots. We know doing how much value it brings. So that's another, being able to scale automatically and bring them back in, not just scaling up when demand is there, but that log on storm at 9 a.m. or whatever. It's then being able to, over the day, as people drift off the VDI solution, bring back in the costs, right? And Nerdio does a great job there. To to things like image management and user provisioning. All that automation piece is critical. Next for me, probably the security, right? So that, as James was talking about earlier, that deep integration with the Microsoft ecosystem. We can leverage the MFA and conditional access from Entra ID and all the goodness there, and how we manage Intune and things, right? So there was, but then ultimately, I think for really proof point for Nerdio is that simplicity. I don't want my third level expensive resources working on that once they've set the mold and the direction we're going. It's got to be down at those second. If that second level techs can't pick this up inside a week or so, then it's the wrong platform. And that's, I can confirm, we do that all the time, right? It's really about getting those, enabling and encouraging curiosity and knowledge in those lower end techs so that they can develop their careers, but also that we can offer an effective and cost-effective solution to our current clients.
Yeah, simplicity is just so important. Let's keep everything simple, please, as much as possible. Life is complicated enough. So, James, what are some of the key risks or misconceptions Aussie MSP should be aware of when planning to migrate away from Citrix?
Yeah, well, often one of the key, perceived risks is, the solution. There's a lot of inertia around. It currently works. It's not broken, so maybe let's not try and fix it. And whilst it's expensive and costing everyone too much money, maybe there's a hesitancy to move away from. And this isn't just in IT. This is in all facets of life, right? So one of the things that I mentioned earlier, being able to build in parallel and demonstrate through a proof of concept to the client that this is native AVD, with Nerdio. Moving from some of their on-prem systems into Azure, you can show them that it's going to work before they then have to sort of make any commitment. And the other biggest misconception that we see is that it often is there's a perceived it's going to take us at least 6, if not 9 to 12 months, if not longer in some cases, to kind of migrate off. And I want to kind of probably throw to Paul. You've got a pretty apt case study that we can throw up on the screen. For the audience at the moment, we had, I've gone one too far. We had an aged care provider that we were working with you guys with that needed to sort of, modernize their current VDI solution. They're experiencing service disruptions with their Citrix infrastructure. And I'll leave it to you, Paul, to sort of tell the audience of what you're able to achieve with Nerdio in terms of the time frame that you're able to do that migration.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing projects that fast all the time because we did have to go back and clean some things up. But what was really pleasing is we were able to deliver a tremendous amount of value and stability into that business really, really quickly. I think it is important that what you were talking about, though, James, is that whenever we're doing a VDI project, so we're looking at replacing RDS or Citrix or comparing, it's a technology that you should not migrate. What you should do is build brand new next door to it, and then test it to your heart's content and flick over. And of course, then from a change and risk point of view, we can always flick back, right? And it's just an icon that the user presses on the desktop, right? So definitely side by side. What that means, though, is we can move extremely quickly, like in this case, right? So in this case, they were already established in Azure. We had to bring AVD to the party to solve that end user compute problem. We got 4,000 users in a 2-week period using that. That's a tremendous amount. I mean, imagine the scale and the infrastructure and the compute and things behind that, the configuration that you need inside that. So obviously we brought Nerdio and my engineers to the fore, and we were able to turn that around inside of 2 weeks. Now, did have to go back and clean up some of the personas and the applications that we're using needed a little bit of tidying up, but that ability to move without impacting any of the business in that 2 weeks, they continued using their old legacy system. We built a new one and then literally flicked them over. Right, that's an important aspect, I think, when you're looking at VDI type solutions. Is particularly if you're moving them to cloud, we really want to build fresh, and we want to move them to Windows 11 multi-session. Right, like you said, the license is covered by Microsoft. Let's get onto that. It's a modern end user compute environment. So obviously, one of the things we've had for many years in VDI as a challenge is those trying to squeeze end user applications onto a server operating system, and then the user doesn't get quite the right feel, and we try and mask over it, and it's a bit clunky, and then the apps don't always work properly because it's a different operating system. In AVD, it's Windows 11. It's Windows 11, Windows 11. It's exactly what you're using on your laptop, right? You're just able to do that in a multi-session environment. And I challenge some of our clients to think differently once they've got that. So if you've got a virtual desktop that is the same operating system, the same code as the one that you're deploying onto your physical devices, why wouldn't you test your apps and your patching there first? I know there's still the drivers and the physical component, but it's a smaller subset, and you can, with AVD as a desktop and your testing environment, you can spin them up, spin them back, go to a backup copy. There's so much flexibility as an IT team, so you should work there first. Get rid of some of the challenges, and then go and work on your physical as the next step.
I think, yeah, one of the key things from our point of view, or what we've seen with this aged care provider as well, Paul, was when you first told me about this project, one of the long-term strategies of this client is, again, probably due to their experience previously with Citrix, is VDI was viewed as this legacy system. It was failing. It was a risk. So our long-term plan is to move off, right? To start going from 4,000 users, we're going to move off. And they sort of had a point in time that we talked about. But what CubeSys has been able to deliver with AVD, what we've seen is a customer that is now completely happy with their AVD environment, can now focus on other projects. It's not sort of an expensive, sort of risky solution. It's a solution that just works. And rather than now having to plan to then move off this legacy system, you've delivered them sort of something that is a real enabler for their business, and they can now focus their efforts sort of elsewhere and other IT projects within their company.
Correct. We've taken all the heat out of that, but also we haven't taken them away from their strategy. Right? So if their strategy still goes down that Intune modern management piece on the physical devices, if they want to get a different balance as they move to more SaaS, as we know, we can do that with the flexibility. And that desktop that they're using now inside of AVD is exactly the same one as they're going to be using, like all the policies and config and everything else, as they're going to use on their physical thing. So we've got a real like for like. So we've got a bridge there between the technologies. We've got a BCP like type solution for them immediately. But most importantly, not that client, because it was to take away the heat, and they've got a lot of work on, right? And that just meant that this problem has gone away, and we can focus our energies elsewhere. Isn't that good?
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a really great user case. I love that. 4,000 user deployment completed in 2 weeks. That's phenomenal. Time saving. We love it. Paul, I guess in a similar ilk, in a competitive local market, how can MSPs stand out with virtual desktop services, and how has Nerdio helped you differentiate your services offering?
I think it can change the narrative that you take to clients, right? So we can compete on clarity and capability, right? And not just on cost. Right? Everybody, often when we stack things up like that, energy companies use case I told you about, save them thousands and thousands of dollars. We really can reduce the cost point, and that integrated licensing that James has mentioned, etc. But what I'm really focused on is being able to provide an enterprise, mature, capable desktop that the end user likes using. And VDI and the word Citrix was always, in most large corporates I've worked in, was like, oh, that's Citrix solution, because not that the technology is great, but it just didn't get the outcome that you want, right? And that's where we really try and focus and differentiate and add encouragement. You can do that once you've got your team's not worrying about all the infrastructure and widgets under the hood, which is what Nerdio helps us achieve, right? And focus on the outcome for the client, right? And the experience of that end user.
Yeah, and James, where are you seeing the strongest demand or opportunity for AVD and Windows 365 in Australia, and how do you feel like MSPs can capitalize on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's always, as we've discussed it, there's always going to be those use cases of clients with legacy business applications that really can only be deployed through a virtual desktop environment, and those organizations and those opportunities aren't going away anywhere soon. There's also, I'm sure, a lot of our audience and a lot of MSPs probably have clients utilizing RDS that are on-prem. So those workloads there you can take into the cloud. But when we look outside of sort of the traditional legacy business application use cases, what we're seeing a lot of, especially here in Australia, post-pandemic, being in a hybrid work world, organizations that are moving to, they don't want to manage a fleet of corporate issued devices. So they're moving into a model where maybe they give their end users a stipend. You go purchase your own laptop, but now you're dealing with a fleet of non-corporate issued devices, right? This BYOD, device world. That's where a virtual desktop can be leveraged in solutions like that, especially when we're looking at overseas workers. We've seen a real growth in offshore workers in the Philippines, in India, providing anything from sort of virtual assistants to call centers, but organizations, might have a requirement that their data needs to stay sovereign to Australia. So you can't have those users in those organizations offshore, or whether it's contractors, let's say, you can't have your company's data being stored locally on those sort of, non-corporate issued devices. So we're seeing more and more of these use cases where, AVD and that, again, that flexibility where it doesn't have to be an all or nothing solutions. It's not like the entire organization needs to move to AVD or have a virtual desktop delivered through Windows 365. It could just be those 10, 20, 50 users that need it. And the rest of the organization can stay physically managed endpoints with Intune and with Defender and with these other native Microsoft tools, because the whole system sort of bleeds into each other and blends in seamlessly with inside Microsoft. So we're seeing, I'm seeing more and more use cases where MSPs come to us, say, hey, I've got this client. They've got an offshore, call center, 20 users. We need to deliver them a virtual desktop. Can you help us? So we're seeing that as sort of being a rapid rise. Also, just, contractors and sort of the BYOD model that organizations are moving to.
Well, how many of us have got those, or have got clients where they've got, they just issue a laptop, like a physical laptop, if they want a third party to come in and work with them, because there's no secure way to connect to them, and it's got to be on one of their devices, right? So why do that when you could have AVD, who's got exactly the same capabilities of that laptop, and you don't have to ship it around? And to your point, James, overseas workers, overseas developers, call centers, even just organizations that have a small footprint in, say, Europe or the US, how do they get to corporate systems that are sat in Australia, right? And all of that is answered with a virtual desktop, right? And that can give the end user a great experience. Like you said, things in call centers like audio and particularly Teams is really sort of efficient over AVD and works well. So lots and lots of use cases. Students is another one we see a lot of. I got a client that was really struggling to get students into an engineering lab, so they had to have GPU enabled desktops, and so literally students would be queuing out the door to come in and do their assignments. And then we brought AVD to the piece with GP2 workloads, and off we go. They're working from home now, and no more like queuing up in labs and waiting outside. Just can work 24/7. Right? So all those sort of benefits, as you start deploying AVD, more and more use cases come out.
Yeah, just everyone's benefiting from it, whether they work overseas or they're a student. It seems AVD is just like helpful for everyone. James, what advice would you give to those MSPs who are ready to start their journey with Nerdio?
Get in contact with us as a starting point. Have a call with us. Also understand, if you've got some clients that you're looking at that have maybe a requirement for AVD, do you want to be an MSP that really offers, desktop as a service, right? Is this a space that you want to work in, or do you want to partner with? We've got partners in the market like CubeSys that offer white labeled services for other MSPs that don't want to add that string to their bow. That's totally fine. If you've got an area, if you're an MSP and you've got an area of specialization, and you've got clients that have a requirement for AVD, because there is a learning curve at the beginning as you sort of start to kind of build up that knowledge around not just Nerdio, but also sort of how AVD is best architected. Will help you along that journey. But making that decision at the start, do you have, are you doing this because you have a client that's come to you and you don't plan to do any other AVD? If that's the case, reach out to us. We can help you, but we can also introduce you to partners who can help, like the CubeSys of the world. But if you do decide, hey, we really see an opportunity for AVD and for Windows 365, come and chat to us. We've got training camps So we've got a slide that hopefully can show some of the resources. So we've got free in-person training camps. We've got one coming up in September in Sydney. I think it's either the 11th, 12th or the 10th, 11th. We can send out the information to the audience. The training camp, not only is it free, will also cover your accommodation. If you can make it to Sydney. If you're not from Sydney, we also provide meals throughout. So it's not just a free training camp. We also cover the accommodation while you're there. We've got a team of both pre-sales engineers to help you do some of the initial scoping of the project. We also have a team of what we call go-live engineers. They'll actually sit on a call with you and guide you through doing your first sort of greenfield AVD deployments, whether that's as a proof of concept or whether that's a full sort of go-live project for a client. We've got those teams. Again, they're free. You don't have to pay for them. And then we've obviously got the ongoing, support and customer success, internal use licenses for you to get hands-on. So you can trial Nerdio, you can spin up your own demo environment, you can get hands-on with our platform even before you've got your first customer scenario. So if you're interested, reach out to us. We'll get you set up with the platform, get you set up with your internal use licenses, get your hands-on with one of our engineers, and all of that support is provided entirely free.
Great. Well, thanks for that, James and Paul. We'll jump into questions now. I've got one here. I think, Paul, it might be aimed at you. It says, do you as an MSP run an RMM agent on the AVD, or does Nerdio do all that for you?
I'm going to be controversial. We don't have an RMM tool at all at CubeSys. Right? We leverage our skills in Intune and the Microsoft platform. There are a couple of agents like Patch My PC that help us achieve that, but other than that, we're very native to Microsoft. Specifically to AVD, think about what you're doing in there, right? So most of the time, we want to be using a multi-session Windows 11 image. Once it becomes multi-session, a lot of RMM agents struggle, and that would be problematic. But don't forget, a lot of what you're achieving with those RMM agents and tools is because it's on a laptop that could be anywhere. We've got control with AVD and VDI solution, right? It's an image that we're going to maintain, and we're going to use some lovely scripts from Nerdio, some custom actions and things to manipulate things inside that image, but we don't really want an RMM agent getting in the way. So we can control in different ways and using the Microsoft platform to patch and maintain that image and make sure it's secure and things. So the short answer is no, we wouldn't put an RMM agent on, and most of that would be covered by what we need to do with Nerdio and or the Azure platform, right, between the two of them.
And that's a common question we get asked for when I'm working with an MSP is they're used to patching machines with RMM tools. They're used to using their RMM tool to sort of like run the Windows updates. When you're running a virtual desktop and you're running AVD, Microsoft best practice is that you run it off a desktop image, a source image, a golden image, however you want to refer to it as. And part of what you can automate in Nerdio is powering on that image, running your Windows update, patching your applications, and then you can stage during a maintenance window when you want Nerdio to then reimage your session hosts or the virtual machines in the pool. So we can kind of automate that that element of the lifecycle management. The benefit to managing it from a desktop image and not just patching the session host directly, as you mentioned, Paul, with an RMM tool, is you have the ability to roll back. If there's any issue with the virtual machine, if there's an issue with the agent or the FS logics on the machines are designed to be non-persistent. You can remove them, Nerdio will rebuild them automatically. It's part of the sort of auto-healing process built into our platform. And you don't have to worry about, well, I've got an issue with the machine, I need to remove it, but now we need to rebuild it, but we don't have an image. We've got to then reconfigure the applications, and it's sort of a very sort of manual process that an MSP has to deal with. So yeah, using that sort of desktop image and not using an RMM tool is very valuable. Now, you still might want to use an RMM and have it. We've got one sort of built into our platform to do that user shadowing, to do that sort of what we call console connect. So to shadow a user session if they do have any issues, if you need to jump on that machine with them. But again, that agent can be installed when the machine is created. Again, you can automate that process with Nerdio. So you can use your RMM tool for the sort of screen connect type features, of which we have that built into Nerdio, but you don't need it to be running your sort of patching and updating.
Yeah, just probably a little bit of there are different use cases that need slightly different scenarios and things, James. So a lot of what I just talked about there was obviously the mainstay of AVDs in that multi-session space. We do have one-to-one AVD things for particularly people like developers can be a bit funny, and we can give them a self-service portal so they can turn it on and off themselves and do backups and all that sort of wonderful stuff. But sometimes when you've got that one-to-one, we're not wanting to destroy the image every month and or patch that image and then put it into a validation host pool, make sure that everybody's happy, and then release it to production. A lot of that, by the way, those steps can be automated with the Nerdio platform, and you can just be the gatekeeper. But sometimes we've got that one-to-one relationship, and sometimes you do put patching on there in a more traditional way. We might actually use Intune to patch it and deploy things. But if it's that multi-session image, you got to just think a little bit differently about your operations.
Yeah, great. I've got another question here, Paul. What is one thing, or maybe for James as well, what is one thing you wish more Australian MSPs considered before renewing or expanding their customers' Citrix environment?
I think you've really got to be thinking about whether that's future-proof for you now. I mean, Citrix there's nothing wrong with the technology. It's a great technology, but they're not partner-friendly. The user experience isn't as friendly as the what we get out of AVD. So if you're sticking with Citrix, really got to be asking why, because economically it's better. Gartner putting Max way in front. The end user experience, I can tell you, go and use AVD. The end user experience is way better than the traditional VDI thing. So I'd be asking why. Why? What does it gain you? What does it gain you? Is it just that inertia of change that is holding you back? I don't know. What do you think, James?
I'd echo those same sentiments. And again, come and work with us and basically, go through that process of sort of modeling out what is the cost going to look like. Help us use the sort of tools that are built inside of Nerdio, which you don't get inside other platforms, to actually properly sort of cost model what moving the customer's workloads into the cloud is going to cost. Because sometimes there is a perception that, well, I can't, move off our on-prem environment because Azure is expensive. And yes, if it's not optimized and if it's not architected properly, Azure can be expensive. But also, when it is architected properly, and again, we can help you model that out with our tool. It can be really seen as a solution that I'm sure, Paul, you've got clients that are probably 10 and 20 users all the way through to probably 10 and 20,000 users inside of AVD. Sometimes these technologies are viewed as, well, I'm only 20 users, so therefore, AVD doesn't make sense because Azure's too expensive. It's really not the case.
You mentioned, but just to pinpoint for the people in the audience, go and look on Nerdio's website and look at their cost calculator. Right, it really makes, forget the Azure calculator, go and use the Nerdio one, because we can layer in discounts, we can put other products in there, but it'll give you really good numbers on the AVD and how to calculate them because of those use cases. When we're looking at cost modeling between those sort of traditional, particularly on-prem and a modern solution like AVD and back to Nerdio, is we've got to understand not only how many users, but how many are using it at one time and what the hours of operation are. Right, and Nerdio calculator will help you go, and then you'll see those cost savings. Right, if you go, this is going to be on 24/7 and just like that, Azure will be more expensive. Right, that's what you've got to do, is leverage that Nerdio automation. And I'll give you an idea. I'm pretty sure in most of our clients that by week 2 to 3, Nerdio's paid for itself just in the automation, let alone the operational benefits we gain, right? And the automation and stuff, just on managing the cost of running Azure, right? So it usually pays for itself, right, usually by week 3, right, of any given month. And that doesn't matter on the size of the scale usually, right? The more users you get on there for a client, the more that we benefit, right? So as you scale up, you'll get more and more cost savings.
Yeah, sometimes sounds too good to be true, but when you talk about a platform that saves you more money than it costs to run, it kind of is a bit of a no-brainer.
Yeah. Don't forget that technically no-brainer as well, because what am I putting at risk? It doesn't touch any of the Microsoft control plane or the workloads. It sits alongside them and optimizes them. So you go in there and you can play with it and you go, oh, that's not for me. Take it away. You still got AVD. You still got Azure. Right? It doesn't matter. Right? So both commercially and technically, you can go and have a play with this thing and see if it works for you. Right?
Yeah, great, guys. I mean, we've only got maybe 30 seconds left. But I mean, I guess my final question here is, what is one small change an Aussie MSP could make today using Nerdio that would significantly improve their DaaS delivery in the long run? If you want to give a short answer to that.
Just using our auto scaling just to optimize your customer environment and deliver them a solution that is as cost effective as possible. Right? We chat with a lot of MSPs that have clients, or they come to us, they want a new client, and their Azure environment is costing their clients far too much than it actually should. Leverage Nerdio, leverage our auto scaling. If that's part of all you do, great. You've delivered a more optimized version to your customer. Because I'm pretty passionate about making sure that our customers, because these clients that our MSPs service, aged care providers and the like, they're our taxpayer money, and our funds are going in, and we want these organizations to be able to kind of have these IT setups that are as cost effective as possible. So use Nerdio's auto scaling.
It's a difficult one to answer in 30 seconds, but maybe I'll sidestep it and just say something like, if you're still using legacy VDI, you're in the VHS player mode, right? Going back to that, get on Netflix. Let's get to Nerdio and AVD, and let's start using something that's modern and effective, and you consume it when you want to consume it, rather than these legacy models that are probably pinning you in to working in a particular way.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for today's discussion. It's been so insightful and eye-opening to understand how MSPs can overcome the hurdles with their VDI, and hearing those real-world examples from you, Paul, has been great. And also thank you to everyone for joining this webinar. We really enjoyed your questions. Also, where is the best place to contact Paul and James? Where should people contact you if they have more questions?
You can reach out to me either on LinkedIn or via my email. But our team, I think our details will get shared with all the attendees post. But shoot me an email. It's jmorrow@getnerdio.com.
Yeah, Sam, you can get me on LinkedIn, or it's paulheaton.heaton@cubesys.com.au.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much, and thank you to everyone attending. We had a great morning.
Thank you, Athena.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks, guys.